Hello, friends. Hey, so great to be back with you this week. Hey, in the studios, we have Pastor David Barnes. David pastors High Point Assembly in Royce
City.
David, so glad to have you today.
Well, we're glad to be here.
And it's nice to be inside today.
It's nice and cool.
I mean, I actually thought the weather was going to get a little. I guess it is a little better, right?
It's not bad in the shade in the parking garage.
But it's still a little toasty outside, right?
It is.
So tell us about your family, friend.
Well, I have a wife. We've been married officially 45 years.
See, God does hear and answer prayer, right?
This past week, yes.
Congratulations. That's exciting.
Yeah. And one daughter, one son. My daughter is a teacher, science lead at Magnet School in Garland, and my son is part of the baseball industry.
And hopefully he will be at the end of the season, right?
Maybe he'll have a job once it's done.
It may be with another team. Who knows?
You
right?
never know.
Yeah,
you never know.
You know, when you and I first met, I think it was in Temple, Texas. Does that sound right?
Yes, I was associate with Pastor Elwin.
Yeah, Elwin
for
Johnson.
about 2.5 years.
Yeah, at Bethel. In Temple.
Prior
to that, your background, though, was in retail, right?
I was in retail. I was a store manager for Dillard's whenever I made the transition from, I call it marketplace to ministry, and was in Texarkana. And I was going to church and a board member of Pastor B.J. Smith's church, Northside Assembly, and went from board member to staff. And I think that my daughter always told me I was going in the wrong direction. But I got to see my kids grow up.
Yeah.
Whereas retail, putting in a lot of hours.
The store
every
becomes
week.
your family.
Absolutely.
Whether you wanted to or.
Absolutely, and they didn't mind calling you at any point, and you had to fix it.
Yeah. So. Holidays, when you want to spend time with your family, well, that's the big time.
Sure.
For retail. So.
Well, usually on Christmas, Clay, we would the store would close at 6 on Christmas Eve, which meant you had some things to do afterwards. Usually got out of the store at best 6:45, and then we pretty much loaded in the car and made a 2.5 hour drive to one of our parents and spent a little time there and got up the next morning with the other one and then came home and went to work. That's just what it was.
So tell us, if you're a store manager for Dillard's, life is pretty good.
Did okay. I was a young man and headed up the corporate ladder. And I though alluded to my wife of 45 years a little bit ago, the divorce rate in retail is not on the side of marriage. And I'd like to think that we could have made it through it, but you never know. But at this point, I know that was where God wanted us to be. I felt like I'd had a call in my life when I was a young boy. I say young boy, probably junior high, but kind of put it off and never, ever thought I would be a pastor. Mm-hmm. And that kind of was like, no, I'm not doing that. But
we're going to talk about that journey for a minute. Because myself, the Lord spoke to me as a teenager about being a minister, and I went, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I can give you all kinds of reasons for that, but the truth of the matter is I have my own agenda. Not that anybody else has that problem.
No, I think I had my own agenda as well.
I had my own agenda. And one day the Lord said, have you had enough?
Yeah. How's that working for you?
Yeah. And my background, too, was retail. So,
I had a grandfather that was a district superintendent in the Assemblies of God in Arkansas.
Okay.
And he lived in the Hot Springs area, and my mom was born in Russellville, but I never ever had that on my radar, ever.
So tell us about that journey. You're at Dillard's, making a few dollars.
Well, I was a young man making a healthy living, was able to keep Sharon at home, and just at that time we just had one child, Amber, and then Jeremy came along. But that was right before we made the transition into the ministry side of things, so he didn't feel that effect. But yet, we had to make some adjustments and we had to make some decisions, obviously, and it was just a journey that we had to do. And in the back of my mind, Clay, I always said, if this doesn't work out in ministry, I'll always go back. And I was at an ordination service, and Pastor Trask was preaching a message. It wasn't my ordaining class, but yet he was preaching a message about burning the plow. And God really got a hold of me that I was paying more attention to looking back than I was looking forward. And I had to get to the point of just saying...
Are you saying you had one hand on that plow even though you were moving another direction?
When things got a little tight financially, I always would say, you know what, I can do this behind me thing again. And God said, no, you got to burn it. And we made that decision and haven't looked back.
So you were... Talk to us for a minute about that decision. I mean, what happened? You're in you're in retail. You're doing okay. Obviously not in love with the hours. Probably in love with the provision, but probably not in love with the hours. But what happened?
I don't really know that I can define it to a specific moment. I love the intensity of retail. That kind of fit my personality. I love people, and so it was kind of like I was in a sweet spot. But yet, in my heart, every time I would be involved in ministry, I felt just the strong tugging of the Holy Spirit saying, this is the way you are to go, not that. And you have intensity in ministry, and you have people in ministry, and sometimes the people are the intensity. And so, it takes to that.
I met with a district official several years ago, and he obviously pastored his whole life. And so I asked him, I said, so do you miss pastoring? And he paused for a minute, and I went, oh, this isn't going to go the way I thought it was going to go, right?
Yeah.
He said, I do, but I don't.
I do, but I don't.
He said, I miss the people, but I don't miss the problems, Yeah. So.
Well, unfortunately, I think a pastor today is called on to do more than they're capable of doing.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And, you got to be a legal mind. You've got a marketing mind. You've got to have every aspect of everything. And bottom line is we're not, and I'm not. And so...
And you need a doctorate in psychology.
Yeah. But when you get to the point of just saying, okay, I'm who I am.
Yeah.
And you can be comfortable in that, I think that helps a lot.
Right. Yeah, something that I think we've gotten away from is that if we're not careful, ministry becomes a profession.
Yeah, you can become a professional. You could become a professional churchgoer, a professional pastor, a professional, God follower, if you will. I think that our church has taken a real, I'm not going to say a step back because I think it's a step forward this year, and once again reestablishing who we are in relationships, knowing and being known, loving and being loved, serving and being served, and celebrating and being celebrated. And if we're not careful, we live on one half of that and not the other half, because it's easy to say, I love you, but yet for me to be loved, I have to expose myself a little bit, and that puts you in a. But it's real relationships, and that's where it becomes fun. It's when it's professional, is when it's not.
Yeah. Every week, our goal is to give people a nugget, something they can work on. And the verse that I had for this week is Romans chapter 11, verse 29. It says, "For God's gift and His call can never be withdrawn."
Absolutely.
His call can never be withdrawn. I believe that the Lord has a call for all of us. Go ahead.
Oh, no. Everyone has a call of God in their life.
Right.
And too many times we've looked for the professional to do the call of God for us. Give a little bit of offering.
Ouch.
Do
Ouch.
a little. Oh, well. Isn't that true, though? And ultimately, it comes together is where it's at, not trying to get somebody to do this or that or the other. And I don't even know if I made sense on that, but.
First off, we misunderstand the role
Sure.
of a pastor.
Sure. And I think that I grew up with that misunderstanding. The pastor did everything, and we created that culture.
We
though.
did.
I always say my grandfather's generation, my dad's generation, even my generation were guilty of getting people, and the goal was to come sit and listen. And as opposed to engaging life and being part of the hands of God, and the role of the pastor is to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. Right. And I'm seeing that right now. We've got a couple people in hospitals, and it's been, my schedule's been difficult just to go across the Metroplex to get to the hospital.
Doesn't help as you get across the lake.
Yeah. Once we get across the lake, it's a little better. But yet I've been getting calls daily. Well, I went by and saw them. I did this. Here's a report. And all of a sudden you're okay, this is what it's supposed to be. And not just the pastor becomes Superman and tries to take care of everything. So,
it's obviously music has changed in our time.
A little bit. Just a little.
I'm good with that. And even if I wasn't good, I would say when it first started, I probably drug my heels a little bit. But my initial response was, I know where I'm going. So if this is what it takes for the next generation to accept Christ as Lord, then come on. I had a friend that he came in and began pastoring this older church. And first thing, he brought his worship leader with him. And so the music changed like immediately. So they had a deacon. Deacon. I started to say demon. No, deacon meeting. Deacon meeting. And they were all upset about the music. And just let him know, I said, we don't like this music. So his response to them was, I understand. He said, how many of you have children or grandchildren that are not coming to church? And many in that meeting did. He said, would you like for me to reach them?
Yeah.
And, of course, they're not, I mean, you love your family, right?
Yeah.
So they immediately said yes, and it was a turning point for them. The challenge on the music is if we're not careful, it becomes a concert, and instead of worship. It's like, and I do not fault for those that are worship leaders out there. Stay with me just for a minute.
You may have lost. No.
Yeah. Click.
Yeah.
But it becomes like you've come to a concert, and they're worshiping the Lord, and we just come. We're not even participators. We're just kind of there, basking in the presence, instead of them realizing that they are there to lead us. Going back to, and I'm not saying go back to the hymnals. I'm not saying that I don't want to go back. Whatever it takes to reach this next generation, I vote for that. But with the hymnals, there was more participation from the congregation. Now that doesn't mean that in our current music that doesn't need to happen, but you have to teach your people. This worship team up here, paid, unpaid, whatever they are, they're not here to entertain us. They're not even here to worship for me or for us.
And that's what it can become sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And instead of, we need to join them.
Well, I think that ultimately everyone throughout their week can choose anything they want to listen to throughout music for their individual time of worship. But when we gather together, we have a leader that ultimately we believe is praying and seeking God's heart, and we're to follow that. And when we do that, we find great unity. If we try to not follow that, then we find a lot of division in that. And then you start nitpicking the little things as opposed to finding the commonality in the bigger ones.
Right. Well, plus finding out what part of the load are you
Yeah.
supposed to be.
Well, it's simple. The word sometimes, I'm not a theologian, and I think you know that. I'm pretty much Southeast Arkansas boy, and my degree is in marketing from a secular university. I know, click. But
I need to talk to you after service. I need some marketing advice.
yeah. But ultimately, Jesus is pretty clear on the purposes of what we're supposed to do individually and as a church, that we're to worship God, number one.
Right.
And that becomes the deal. And how do you do that? And so you can't just say, well, you follow this pattern or that pattern, because everybody has an individuality in seeking God and finding God. But he says, you know what? Worship me first. And then the second commandment is like the first.
Yeah.
Love your neighbor.
Right, as yourself.
And so it's awful hard to love my neighbor if I'm not worshiping God.
Absolutely. And there's not a whole lot to offer there.
Yeah.
Either.
I've been kind of hung up on something in my head, and I don't want to come out of left field with it, but yet a lot of times we try to minister, we're talking about pastoring, ministering out of an empty heart sometimes, meaning, or we've tried to get knowledge or whatever. But ultimately, when Peter came out of the temple, he was worshiping and went to church and came out, and there was a beggar there, and silver and gold don't I have? And I said, well, I think but the leader of the church as such probably could take an offering if he needed to. But yet I think the point was, such as I have.
Right.
What do I have?
Right.
God takes what I have and utilizes it in incredible ways. But yet when I'm trying to give him just what I want,
let's spin this another way. If the church leadership, whatever that looks like at your church, if it's their responsibility to fulfill the Great Commission, when those guys, you can only reach X amount of people, but if we all see ourselves, we all have a responsibility. Now all of a sudden, you've got an army out there rubbing shoulders with a hurting world that's desperately looking for hope. And one of the things that's always been a little challenging for me is this weekend concept. Well, Sunday's really not the weekend.
No.
Sunday's the first day.
First day.
The Bible says give your first fruits. Well, when you're in the house, that's a part of your first fruits. Yeah. You've started out your week with the Lord. And then, Sunday's a time to come together as a body, worship together, pray together, and receive what God has for you. And then now you're ready. I
think it sets the tone for the entire rest of the week.
I totally agree with that. And then when we go out, every morning, the first thing you do is, I like yourself. I'm not a theologian. Maybe that's why we're such good friends, right? And yet I still have the ability to open my Bible. And yes, I have certain. I have a reading plan, but it doesn't matter what the plan is. When I open it up, my prayer is exactly the same every day. Holy Spirit, speak to me.
Sure.
And he doesn't talk to me because I'm a pastor. He talks to me because I'm a son.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And if we all do that, then there'll be some verse, and it could be a verse that you've read 100 times, and for the first time, it becomes living water to us. Yeah. And then that day, you got something to talk about.
Sure. We had a guest speaker in our church Sunday, and I won't go into the name of who or anything else, but they made a statement that was incredibly powerful to me, that when they grew up in church, but they were still at a point in their life extremely lost, is what they basically were saying, that their lostness was great. Went through a lot of quote-unquote life and divorce and all the things that quote-unquote the church would say, well, that's, you're disqualifying yourself a little. Mm-hmm. But yet she prayed that she would never forget what it felt like to be lost. Mm. And I think when we go back into that capacity with our own lives, we have great compassion for those who are lost, But when we forget, we don't remember. And that's a terrible place to be. And thus, then God, how does He speak to us? And how can He? Sometimes we have to, as Hebrews said, go back and be retaught. But now we should be teachers, but we once again need to be re-educated in the process.
Or we remain babies.
Yeah.
And we never grow.
Yeah.
And then as a result, that's where as a pastor, that same problem, it just, keeps perpetuating itself.
Well, and I think that's part of life together is helping each other grow up. There's not a single parent that has a child that after 6 months, 3 months, if that child is not developing, they would not already be engaging into the experts of saying, what's going on? What do we need to do? And yet we accept it readily in the Christian faith that they're just, whatever. No, it's not whatever. It's ultimately life and death, I think, for a lot of people in life, because they are there to reach out to the world that around them and be instruments of righteousness.
It's also as you begin to absorb this living water into your life, it can't help but to overflow everywhere you go. Whereas if you don't, it becomes very stale. You become very, very complacent. And the first thing you know, you're making bad decisions.
I saw, and I again, my revelations are probably old to a lot of people, but yet as you develop in God, you see the first thing in people's life that goes, one of the first two things is prayer and the Word. Mm-hmm. And, it seems like, well, we know enough or we've prayed enough, but yet that's the everyday thing.
Right.
And that's just the little thing that shouldn't be a drudgery. It shouldn't even, I know it's the discipline, but how cool is it to spend time with God?
Right. Who are we that He would speak to us?
Yeah, who are we? That's good.
Rebellious children.
Yeah.
And yet He loves us anyway.
Now, you must be talking solely of yourself, not me, right? I'll take the us.
I've made a few mistakes in life.
Yeah, sure. We all have, right?
But God.
Hey, but you went to a Mets game the other day, so that was.
Well, I don't know if we need to say that publicly.
I'm sorry.
My Ranger fans here could get really.
It was strictly because of a connection that you had.
It was a friend that invited me to that game. They do have a nice stadium, I will say that. So it was cool. As you know, David, we're believing God for a big miracle right now. We've been on this journey for quite some time to build new facilities. You've met this new generation, young generation. Of course, for me, everybody is the young generation.
I'm there.
But it's incredible what the Lord has done in our city. And as you know, they're missing a major tool in their belt, and that is permanent long-term facilities that will, right now we're renting a couple of facilities. And we're making it work, but they need this new tool. Not only do they need this tool, but it needs to be debt-free. I'm convinced that putting them in some kind of long-term note, some kind of easy monthly payment, is bondage, and they'll find themselves trying to make an easy monthly payment. Maybe you never had those before, but I've had those before. Yeah. It's very, very difficult. Instead of them doing what God's called us to do, which is to reach the lost, minister to the children in the inner city, and through the children, reach the entire family. So there are people out there, this is their very first time. They've probably listened to us. They heard that David Barnes is going to be on here today.
Oh, I'm sure.
So they've joined in, and they go, I want to hear what Pastor David has to say today. So if you were to tell them, why should they get involved and help us build this facility?
$1 million question, Clay. I think to me, it's just simply relationship. It's partnering in places I can't go and doing things I can't do. We're not all located in the area you are, nor do we have the gifts to reach the people that you've been asked and called to reach. But together we can. And a lot of times we get our eyes focused on maybe what we can't do as opposed to what we can do. I think just to me it's when we were involved in backpacks or school supplies or whatever, it's just the kids and hearing the testimonies of the staff people that I've interviewed, been in committees where we've interviewed them and come for credentialing and hear their story of their first bus ride to Metro, and that's why, because there is a future out there, and there's and we've got to continue to be part of that. And even though if all odds are stacked against us, the word still says the gates of hell cannot prevail.
Right. I was at a missions convention recently, and they reminded me of something that I knew. There are senders, and then there are goers. Or another way to put it, there's the givers, and then there's goers.
Yeah.
One can't work without the other. And so we're believing God for an incredible miracle.
Absolutely.
And believing that other pastors, just like yourself, will join with us and believe us for this big miracle.
I think I told you a long, long time ago, and I can't remember how long, maybe when it was in Temple when we first met, that I just want to be a friend.
Yeah.
And I think part of being a friend is helping when you can.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you can't.
Yeah. For those who haven't been down the road, they don't understand that.
Yeah.
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 David, thanks for being here today.
It is my pleasure.
Hey, guys, thanks for tuning in today, for watching us. Thank you for being a part of what David's been. He has been a good friend for a lot of years. I would encourage you to go to our webpage, dallasmetro.org. Click on All In. That's what the campaign's called. And in there, you'll see the drawings and some concepts of the building. And we're believing God for an incredible miracle. We're really, really close. We're almost have the finished drawings done, and then it'll be going to the architect. And the things are going to be happening pretty rapidly. But they can't happen without you. You know, God's given us this dream of building brand new facilities, building them absolutely debt-free. That means it's going to take both of us working together. I'm asking you to help me today. Go to dallasmetro.org, click on All In, then click down at the bottom, get involved. And if you would give a one-time gift, or maybe you make a commitment to help us for the next year, and believe God for a miracle with us. So glad to see you. See you next week. God bless you.